The merciless twin suns of Proxima Theasi burned down on the barren plateau, their light so fierce it seemed to strip color from the land itself. Heat shimmered off the cracked stone as David Ka wrestled the yoke of his battered transport, guiding the ship across another stretch of emptiness. Sweat ran in rivulets down his neck, soaking into the collar of his utility shirt. The ship's cooling system wheezed its protest with every gust of hot air it managed to spit out. Another thing on the endless repair list. Another reminder that nothing stayed together since Elena's death. He smacked the console with calloused knuckles. Hold together, you piece of junk. Just a little longer. 6 months since he buried her, and everything seemed to be falling apart. The ship, the hydroponics rig, the livestock pen he could barely keep operational. His life. Only his daughters kept him moving forward 3 bright sparks against a universe that had turned dark. Lily, Selena, and little Melanie. They needed him, and so he worked, scavenged, and scouted. Anything to keep them fed and sheltered on this unforgiving rock. He hadn't planned on stumbling into anyone else's business. He was supposed to be mapping mineral deposits, charting new veins he might trade at Helios Station. Instead, when his ship crested a jagged ridge, he saw movement below that froze him in place. A group of Verdani stood in a tight ceremonial circle. Tall, emerald-skinned, their elongated limbs gave them a predatory elegance, like blades of living jade. Sunlight glinted off their elaborate markings, symbols of rank and lineage. At the circle's center, a mound of fresh earth rose like a cruel monument, and in that mound a figure writhed weakly. David's chest tightened as he grabbed his binoculars. The lenses sharpened the terrible image. A woman, her green skin gleaming with sweat, buried up to her neck in the scorching sand. Only her head remained above the packed earth, lips cracked, strands of dark hair plastered to her brow. Her eyes large, almond-shaped, violet like a dusk sky darted frantically. Searching, the Verdani elder raised his voice in a language David could not understand, his tone heavy with ritual and finality. Then, as one, the group turned and strode to their sleek vehicles, leaving the woman behind. Dust swirled in the air as they sped away, abandoning her to the suns and the predators that prowled the plateau by night. David lowered the binoculars. Slowly, he had heard of Verdani methods, their rigid caste structures, their obsession with fertility. Infertile women, it was said, were stripped of status and erased. But hearing stories and seeing the cruelty enacted were 2 different things. This woman, whoever she was, had been condemned for the crime of being barren. To the Verdani, she was no more than wasted flesh. He told himself to leave. He had no business here. No reason to put himself in danger. The Verdani would not hesitate to execute a human caught interfering in their rituals. He had 3 young girls waiting at home, depending on him. And yet, even from this distance, he could feel her gaze. Her eyes, filled not just with fear, but with a will to live, locked onto the horizon where he watched. She could not see him clearly, but somehow she seemed to sense him. Begging without words, his heart hammered. He thought of Elena, of how she had fought her illness until the last breath, how she had begged the Verdani physicians for help only to be told their medicines were incompatible with human biology. He thought of the nights he had held his daughters as they cried themselves to sleep, promising them they were not alone. The suns dipped lower, their long shadows stretching across the plateau. The predators would come soon, drawn to her helplessness. David clenched his jaw, cursing under his breath. Damn it all, he whispered. His decision was made before the words even left his mouth. Instead of turning the ship for home, he began to chart a route back to the execution site, every instinct warning him of the danger, every memory reminding him why he could not walk away. He powered the engines up again, the old transport groaning as though it, too, objected to his plan. David Ka had not set out to become anyone's savior. But as the twin suns bled into the horizon and the desert began to howl with unseen voices, he knew he could not let her die buried in sand. The suns had begun their slow descent, bleeding gold and crimson across the cracked desert floor as David guided his transport back toward the execution site. The ship's suspension groaned when he landed on the ridge, a sound loud enough to set his nerves on edge. He cut the engines and sat for a moment in the silence, staring out at the barren wasteland where death waited patiently for the abandoned. Woman. His hand hovered over the ignition again. He could still turn around. He could be home before full. Dark, back in the prefab shelter, where Lily braided her sister's hair and Melanie laughed at her own jokes. But then his mind replayed the moment he'd lowered the binoculars and felt that woman's eyes, those desperate, unyielding eyes fix on him. He strapped the service pistol to his thigh, grabbed a collapsible shovel, and stepped out into the heat. The air hit him like a wall, thick and dry, stinging his lungs with each breath. He moved fast, boots crunching across gravel and sand, the shovel banging lightly against his thigh as he descended the ridge. The woman's head jerked toward him when his shadow fell across her. Her lips cracked further as she whispered, voice rasping like dry reeds, human. Why? David crouched low, pressing a finger to his lips. Save your strength, he said, and started digging. The sand was packed tight around her, heavy with heat, clinging like concrete. Every shovelful came up reluctantly, but he worked methodically, his marine training guiding his hands. Dig, pivot, clear, again. Sweat soaked through his shirt, trickled into his eyes, but he didn't slow. The woman's eyes fluttered, watching him, disbelief warring with hope. They will kill you, she croaked. If they find you, then let's not get found, David muttered, throwing another spadeful over his shoulder. The desert had begun to sing with eerie noises, the keening cries of nocturnal predators waking for their nightly hunt. There! Voices echoed across the plateau, closer than David liked. His stomach tightened. He dug faster. After what felt like hours, the earth loosened enough for him to wedge his arms around her shoulders and heave. She gasped as her body came free, collapsing limply against him. Beneath the dirt and sweat, her form was slender but strong, skin shimmering faintly with fine markings that seemed to glow in the fading light. David wrapped her in his thermal cloak, shielding her from the cooling night air. She was light, far too light for her height, as if her body had been carved down by punishment and deprivation. I've got you, he murmured, lifting her into his arms. You're safe now. Her head lolled against his shoulder, vilely, eyes half-lidded, but still searching his face. My name? Thalia, she whispered. I was Thalia Nix. David, he replied, carrying her across the sand. David Ka. The howls grew closer, a chorus of hunger rolling over the plateau. He risked a glance at the horizon. 2 pairs of eyes glimmered there, low to the ground, stalking. He adjusted his grip on Thalia and broke into a jog, every muscle screaming. In protest, as he pushed his body harder than it had in years, the ship loomed ahead like salvation. He staggered up the ramp and hit the seal button with his elbow, the hatch hissing shut just as claws scraped against the outer hull. The predators threw themselves against the metal, snarling, but the ship held. David collapsed onto the floor of the cargo bay, cradling Thalia. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to breathe. Daddy? The voice froze him. He twisted toward the shadows, and 3 small blonde heads peeked from behind a stack of supply crates. Lily, Selena, Melanie. His daughters. His heart dropped. What the hell are you doing here? He demanded, voice sharper than he intended. Melanie's eyes welled with tears, her tiny arms clutching the cloak she dragged with her. Lily, ever the defiant leader, jutted her chin. We wanted to help. You looked scared when you left. Thalia's gaze shifted between the human children and David, wonder softening her expression. These are yours? She asked faintly. My daughters, David said tightly, running a hand through his damp hair. Who were supposed to be at home? Selena stepped forward cautiously, her blue eyes wide as she studied the green-skinned woman. She's pretty. Why is she green? David opened his mouth to answer, but the ship's proximity alarm blared before he could. On the view screen, distant lights glowed against the darkness. Verdani patrol vehicles, closing fast. David's pulse hammered. He turned back to his daughters. Strap in, he ordered. Now we're leaving. As the engines roared and the ship began to lift, Thalia's eyes met his reflection in the console glass. Her voice was stronger now, urgent. You have endangered your family for me. Why? David shoved the throttle forward, the transport hurtling skyward as the first shots from Verdani pursuers streaked past. He bared his teeth in something between a grimace and a grin. That's a conversation, he growled, for when we're not being shot at. The black of space swallowed the desert world below, stars scattering across the void like cold fire. David's ship shuddered as it broke atmosphere, the battered thrusters straining against velocity before settling into the steady hum of orbit. He let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, fingers locked around the controls until his knuckles ached. The proximity alarms quieted. For now, they were free. Behind him, the cargo bay was alive with nervous energy. His daughters huddled around the cot where Thalia lay beneath a thermal blanket, their voices hushed but curious. Lily, always the little commander, guided a hydration pack to the alien woman's cracked lips. Selena dabbed her brow with a damp cloth. Melanie clutched the corner of the blanket as though her small hand alone could keep Thalia tethered to life. David rose from the pilot's seat reluctantly and moved to the bay, his boots echoing against the warm plating. He knelt beside the cot, scanning Thalia with his old medical reader. The device whined softly, its readout flashing vitals he didn't entirely understand, but knew enough to worry about. How are you feeling? He asked, his voice gentler. Now that the immediate danger had passed, Thalia's violet eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on him. Recovering, she whispered, her melodic tone stronger than before. Your offspring. Attentive. Daughters, David corrected. Automatically. On Earth, we call female children daughters. Thalia repeated the word softly, as if testing its shape. Daughters. Her gaze shifted to the three blonde heads clustered around her. You have been kind to a stranger. This is not common. Among many species, Lily puffed her chest proudly. Dad says helping people in trouble is what makes us human. A shadow of a smile touched Thalia's lips, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. She tried to sit, and David moved quickly to support her, adjusting the blanket around her slender shoulders. For a moment, her markings shimmered faintly in the dim light, patterns like starlight etched into her emerald skin. We're heading to Helios Station, David explained, a trading post on the system's edge. We'll get you supplies, clothes, and figure out what comes next. No, she said firmly, though her voice trembled with weakness. There is no we. You have already risked too much. At Helios, I will depart. David's jaw tightened. And go where? The Verdani have outposts across this sector. The moment you're seen, they'll finish what they started. A shadow passed across her face. Perhaps that is my fate. Before David could answer, Melanie piped up, her tiny voice sharp with outrage. That's stupid. You can't go. You can stay with us forever. Thalia blinked at the little girl, surprise flickering in her expression. Selena, ever practical, tilted her head. Why did they bury you? Was it because you're sick? The alien woman hesitated. Her gaze softened, sadness threading her words. Among my people, the ability to produce offspring is sacred. Those who cannot are deemed flawed, unworthy of consuming resources. That's barbaric, Lily declared, her 8-year-old certainty cutting through the silence. Mom couldn't have any more babies after Melanie, but she wasn't flawed. The mention of Elena sent a sharp pang through David's chest. He looked away, jaw tight, throat aching. Different cultures have different values, he said finally, his voice rough. Thalia lowered her eyes. Even when those values condemn the innocent to die? David met her gaze again. This time, he did not look away. Especially then. The ship's console blared, cutting off whatever else might have been said. David swore under his breath. Striding back to the cockpit, the scanner flared red with approaching signatures. Verdani patrol vessel, he called, his voice grim. They're hailing us. Thalia tried to rise from the cot, gripping the frame with trembling fingers. They must not find me. They will execute all of you for interfering. David's mind raced, soldier instincts sharpening. Then memory struck the smuggling compartment beneath his quarters, a relic from the ship's less lawful owner. Girls, he said tightly, kneeling before them, not a word about our guest. Understand? This is life or death. Their solemn nods were all the answer he needed. He helped Thalia into the narrow compartment, her tall frame curling uncomfortably into the shadows. As the panel sealed shut above her, her violet eyes locked. On his, full of fear and something else, trust. David returned to the cockpit and accepted the hail. The screen flared to life with the stern visage of a Verdani commander, his markings elaborate and his voice cold. Human vessel, identify yourself and state your purpose in this sector. David steadied his breathing. David Ka, registration. THX 1138. Independent prospector and farmer. I'm hauling minerals to Helios Station. Your vessel was observed near a sacred ritual site earlier today, the Verdani said. Explain your presence. David's heart pounded, but his voice remained level, surveying for mineral veins. When I realized I'd entered a ceremonial zone, I left immediately. My apologies. The commander's eyes narrowed. We will. Board for inspection. David clenched his teeth. With respect, Commander, I have 3 young children aboard. I'll submit to a remote scan, but I won't expose them to the risk of aborting. A tense silence stretched. Sweat prickled David's skin. Finally, the commander inclined his head. Very well. Prepare for scan. A beam swept the vessel, humming through every corridor, every panel. David's pulse thundered as it passed. Over his quarters. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, scan complete, the Verdani intoned. Be advised, interference with justice carries the penalty of death. Proceed to your destination. The transmission cut. The screen went dark. David exhaled shakily, dragging a hand down his face. Clear, he called softly. He opened the compartment, helping Thalia out. She trembled, the confinement taxing her already weak body, but her eyes burned with something fierce. You continue to risk everything, she said. I do not understand. David glanced at his daughters, then back at her. Let's just say I've seen enough injustice to know when to fight it. For the first time since he'd met her, Thalia's lips curved into the faintest smile. Then perhaps, she whispered, I was not buried in vain. The glow of Helios Station filled the viewport as David's transport slipped into docking. Alignment. The station loomed like a sprawling metal hive, all jutting modules and busy docking arms, pulsing with the lights of 100 species coming and going. It was a place of commerce, smuggling, and secrets, a place where one more human farmer and his daughters might vanish in the crowd. Or so David hoped. He kept his jaw clenched, fingers steady on the controls. though his chest ached with the familiar tension of impending danger. In the cargo bay behind him, Thalia paced slowly, cloaked in his oversized work clothes, hood drawn low. The garments hid her gleaming skin, but she couldn't hide her height or the aura of something unearthly. His daughters flanked her like bodyguards, Lily proud, Selena wary, Melanie gripping her alien hand as if refusing to let her slip away. When the docking clamps locked in place, David powered down the engines and faced them all. Remember, she's our cousin from the Proyan colonies. If anyone asks, she's visiting. No names, no questions. Got it? The three blonde heads bobbed in solemn unison. Thalia's violet eyes studied him beneath the hood. You place your life in danger for me again. David adjusted the strap of the service pistol hidden beneath his coat. Danger's already here. Best thing we can do is keep moving. The airlock hissed, and they stepped into Helios Station's main concourse. It was chaos contained. Schraders shouting in a dozen languages, hissing vapor from coolant vents, banners, flashing deals on spice and ore. David kept one hand on Selena's shoulder and his eyes scanning for patrols. Thalia walked close, shoulders hunched, her posture uncharacteristically small for someone so tall. They hadn't made it far before he felt it, the sensation of eyes on his back. He turned sharply, but the crowd swallowed all distinction. Just faces, markings, strange bodies moving past. Still, the prickling remained. They secured a small room at the far end of the residential quarter, away from the bustling arteries of the station. Cramped, a single sleeping alcove with a viewport, but private. David insisted the girls wash and rest. He spread blankets on the floor, intending to keep watch. Thalia lingered by the viewport, the hood falling back, her emerald skin catching the starlight. Your kindness confounds me, she murmured. It's not kindness, David said, tightening a blanket across the floor. It's decency, basic decency. Her gaze drifted to him, unreadable. Among my people, basic decency is reserved for those who carry life forward. The barren are treated as less than shadows. Well, David said softly, looking up. At her, your people are wrong. The knock came then soft, deliberate, at the door. David froze, hand on his pistol. Who is it? He called, signaling Thalia with a quick gesture to move out of sight. A hushed voice answered. Someone who knows exactly who you're harboring, human, and someone who wants to help. David cracked the door, weapon drawn. Outside stood a Verdani male, shorter than most of his kind, cloaked in trader garb that half concealed his facial markings. His eyes flicked past David to Thalia. Lady Thalia Nix, he said, bowing slightly. Daughter of Supreme Archon. Valen, I am Kieran of the Reformation. David's pulse spiked. Archon's daughter? He glanced at Thalia. Her posture straightened instantly, shoulders squared, violet eyes flashing with recognition. Kieran, she breathed. From the Science Ministry. May I enter? The Verdani asked urgently. What I have to say should not be spoken in corridors. Against every instinct screaming otherwise, David let him in. He kept his pistol. Raised, the girls peeked from the alcove, wide-eyed. Speak fast. David growled. Kieran nodded. Lady Thalia was not condemned for infertility. That was a lie. She was condemned because she discovered the truth. The Council has been manipulating Verdani fertility for generations, crafting bloodlines, creating artificial castes. Your father, Supreme Archon Valen, ordered your burial to silence you. David turned to Thalia, disbelief surging in him. Is this true? Her face was taut with pain, but she nodded. I was a geneticist. I found the anomalies deliberate. Modifications. When I tried to expose them, they called me sterile and sentenced me to the desert. The weight of it hit David like a blow. She wasn't just a fugitive. She was royalty, a whistleblower. a spark that could ignite a revolution. Before he could speak, Lily's voice called out, panicked. "Dad, Melanie's not feeling good." David rushed to the alcove. His youngest daughter was trembling, flushed with fever, her small body burning with heat. He touched her forehead, heart clenching. "She needs medical attention," he muttered. Kieran's expression turned grim. "The station's medical ward is crawling with Verdani. They will identify her and you. They are already searching." Thalia knelt beside the cot, her hands cool against Melanie's skin. "This resembles Cassorian fever. Common in humans. New to Proxima Theasi, rarely serious if treated quickly." David looked at her, startled. "You know human medicine?" "I studied comparative xenobiology," she replied, her voice steady but urgent. "I can treat her, but I need access to specific compounds." Kieran raised his hood. "I can obtain them quietly. But it will draw attention. We must be swift." David knelt, brushing hair from Melanie's damp forehead. Her small eyes fluttered weakly. For the first time since Elena's death, raw fear clawed through him. Not for himself, but for his child Dot, as Thalia prepared a cool compress, her hand brushed his. For a moment their eyes locked. In hers, he saw not only fear but fierce determination. A determination that matched his own. "Thank you," he whispered. "Your daughter is innocent," Thalia replied softly, "as are all children born into chains not of their making." In the stillness of that cramped room, with danger pressing from every side, something unspoken sparked between them, something neither alien nor human could explain. And outside their door, Verdani patrols closed in. The Grand Assembly Hall of Helios Station had never held such a crowd. Hundreds of Verdani filled the tiered balconies and floor levels, their emerald bodies shimmering with agitation under the stark lights. Merchants had abandoned their stalls, miners their shifts, smugglers their deals. Word had spread like fire. Through dry grass, the Supreme Archon himself had arrived, his personal guard in tow, to hunt a traitor. On the central platform stood Thalia, her hood thrown back, posture tall and unbending despite the danger radiating from every corner of the hall. By her side clung three small figures, Lily, Selena, and Melanie, whose pale hair gleamed like beacons amid the sea of green. Their presence drew whispers, curious and horrified, as though the entire station struggled to comprehend why human children stood beside a condemned Verdani. Kieran's voice carried through the hall's comm system, cutting through the buzz. "Citizens of Proxima Theasi and beyond, you deserve the truth. For generations we have been told that barrenness is a curse, that fertility is the measure of worth. But it was never chance, never the will of the stars. It was control." The crowd erupted in murmurs, some skeptical, others furious. Thalia stepped forward, lifting her voice above the rising noise. "I was buried in sand to silence me, not because I could not bear life, but because I uncovered evidence that our bloodlines have been manipulated, our fertility rationed, engineered, families divided not by fate, but by decree." Gasps and cries filled the chamber. Thalia raised a trembling hand to the display Kieran had hacked into the station screens. Genetic sequences bloomed across, them in luminous patterns, proof of artificial markers woven into lineages. She pointed then to Melanie, who stood nervously but with Lily's hand gripping hers. "This child carries a natural adaptation born of human science and Verdani. Interference. She is proof that our chains can be undone, that our future does not have to be dictated." The hall was thunderstruck. Some Verdani stared in disbelief. Others pressed forward with hope burning in their eyes. The great doors at the far end thundered open. Silence fell like a blade. Supreme Archon Valen entered, regal and terrible, his markings ornate with authority. His personal guard fanned around him, weapons gleaming. His voice carried without effort, cold and commanding. "This is treason. Do not listen to her delusions. My daughter has always been reckless, always enamored with impossible ideals. She speaks not truth, but dangerous fantasy." Thalia's chin lifted. "Then explain these files, Father." Her hand gestured to the screens, where private research logs now played documents only an insider could have obtained. "Explain why whole generations of our people were engineered to fail, while others were granted abundance." The Archon's jaw tightened, but his voice remained smooth. "Stability requires sacrifice. Without control, we would have destroyed ourselves centuries ago." From the crowd, an older Verdani female broke rank, her voice shaking but strong. "For 60 cycles I believed myself barren, worthless. You told me it was fate. Now I see it was by your design." Others rose, voices overlapping questions, accusations, anger building like storm waves. Guards shifted uneasily, their loyalty wavering as the tide turned against their ruler. And then, cutting through the uproar, another voice carried across the chamber. "You talk of sacrifice, Archon, but you bury your own daughter alive to preserve your lies." Every head turned. David Ka strode into the hall, bruised but unbroken, his marine bearing unmistakable, even in torn clothes. The daughters squealed with joy, breaking formation as they raced across the platform to throw their arms around him. He lifted them all in one fierce embrace, eyes locking with Thalia's across the space between them. She had never looked so. Shaken not when facing death, not when standing against her father, until this moment, when the human she thought lost returned alive. "Who valued her life when you discarded it?" David's voice thundered, directed squarely at the Archon. "Who risked everything for truth while you clung to control?" The crowd rippled with emotion shock, admiration, outrage. Valen's gaze darkened, but for the first time, cracks showed in his authority. His guards faltered. Citizens shouted openly now, demanding answers, demanding freedom. Thalia stepped forward, her voice clear, strong, regal. "The time of silence is over. The formula to undo your manipulations is already spreading across Verdani worlds. Your control is ending, not through violence, but through truth." The Archon's face hardened into stone. Yet in his eyes, for the briefest moment, something flickered regret, recognition, or reluctant respect. His voice dropped low for her alone. "You have your mother's conviction." Then, with a subtle gesture, he turned and departed. His authority diminished, his guards trailing behind uncertainly. The hall exploded into noise. Cheers, sobs, voices calling Thalia's name. She stood frozen on the platform, violet eyes shimmering with tears as David crossed to her. For one suspended moment, the revolution, the crowd, the galaxy itself faded away. "You came back," she whispered, voice breaking. "I never left," David murmured, reaching for her hand. Her fingers slid into his, and the hall roared. The suns of Proxima Theasi dipped low on the horizon, painting the desert plateau in bands of amber and violet. David Ka stood at the edge of his homestead, a silhouette against the raw, unbroken land, where once the small prefab house had sagged. With age and despair, now life hummed through it. Hydroponics towers glistened with green, solar arrays gleamed, and a new lab module pulsed faintly with the soft light of growing cultures. It was no longer just a home. It was a beginning. Inside, laughter carried through the thin walls. Lily's voice rose in mock authority as she commanded her sisters to arrange specimens. Selena argued back, her tone sharp but amused. Melanie giggled, the sound bubbling like water in a spring. David smiled faintly. Those were sounds he hadn't expected to hear again, not after Alana's death, not after burying his own hope in the dust. He turned when footsteps approached. Thalia crossed the threshold of the garden, the alien twilight setting her emerald skin aglow. She carried a tray of seedlings, their delicate roots suspended in nutrient mist. Her hair, once matted with sand, now shimmered with health, tied back loosely as she worked. She looked more at ease here, among soil and growth, than she ever had cloaked in fear. They learn quickly, she said, nodding toward the house. Especially Melanie. She seems to understand the plants as if she feels them breathing. David's throat tightened. Like her mother, he said softly. Elena had the same touch. Thalia set the tray down carefully, then straightened. I never imagined this future when you dug me out of that sand. A family, a purpose, love. David stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin against her shoulder. She leaned into him naturally now, no longer stiff or uncertain. That's humanity's gift, he murmured. We imagine impossible futures, and then we make them real. For a while, they stood in silence, watching the sun sink beneath the desert. The world around them, once harsh and empty, now felt like it breathed with them. Inside the lab, Thalia's research continued. The formula derived from Melanie's blood, the legacy of Elena's experiments, was spreading across Verdani space. Reports came daily. Fertility clinics shuttered, genetic markers erased, families once condemned now free to choose their own paths. Verdani society, long divided by cruel castes, was remaking itself painfully but irreversibly. Valen, the dethroned, Archon, had retreated to a distant estate, stripped of power but not entirely of mystery. His parting words haunted Thalia still. You have your mother's conviction. She had begun to wonder what truths lay buried even deeper in her family's history. But those were questions for another time. Tonight, the stars rose clear and sharp above the desert. The girls called from the house, urging them to hurry. Dinner was ready, and Selena had insisted on making the meal herself. David laughed quietly. We'd better go before she burns the whole kitchen module down. Thalia's hand found his, fingers lacing with practiced ease. Your daughters have already decided I am staying, she said with a faint smile. Melanie is planning to redecorate a room for me. Lily insists I teach them Verdani history. Selena, she wants me to show her how to argue like a scientist. And what about their father? David asked, his voice low, his eyes searching hers. What do you think he wants? She turned to him fully, the last light of the sun shimmering in her violet eyes. I think, she whispered, he wants what he's wanted since the day he saw me buried in the sand, to bring me home. He kissed her then, slow and sure, sealing a promise that needed no more words. From burial to belonging, from condemnation to connection, their lives had been remade, as had the future of an entire civilization. And as the desert wind softened and stars crowned the night, David Ka and Thalia Nix stood together, not as rescuer and rescued, not as human and Verdani, but as partners in a life neither could have ever imagined alone.